Welcome in everybody to Carps Corner, and free agency is buzzing in the NFL. Ohio State is on spring break. So spring ball will take a little bit of a reprieve as well. And with everything that's going on, the NFL, the legal tampering period, has begun. There's been a lot of news with that, a lot of trades happening, quarterbacks re-signing, quarterbacks signing other places, and I guess agreeing in principle, because this is what the NFL does. They have their legal tampering period where no one can actually sign a deal, but you can agree in principle to one unless you were already released and were a free agent. We're also seeing, a rash of releases now as well as teams try to clear cap space to sign other players, invest in other parts of the team, and that's really what it comes down to for roster construction. In the NFL, you have a finite amount of dollars, a finite amount of resources. You allocate them the best you can. Some people are bigger in keeping talent in-house. I think everybody really likes to sign a lot of their homegrown products, but sometimes, unfortunately, you can't. Those guys leave. Maybe you have to find a cheaper alternative on the free agency market. And so that's what it's all about right now in this free agent frenzy, is teams trying to plug holes, because what they ultimately want to do is give themselves flexibility as they go into the draft. A lot of general managers, head coaches, front office execs, they don't want to go in to the NFL draft with a glaring need that really pigeonholes them into what they ultimately have to draft. You like to draft for value, drafting for want, and maybe a little bit of need is great, but you like to blend those two things together. And nobody really just wants to go out there and say, hey, we didn't get this done. We have a serious need here and we have to go draft it, because that's how you end up overdrafting players and not ultimately getting the best value. And you get behind yourself as far as roster management. And so instead of drafting guys in preparation for not being able to keep a free agent in future years, you're drafting to fill holes and hoping those guys will develop, and develop really quickly, and you can plug and play them initially, especially in the first couple rounds. So that being said, let's take a little look at some of the things that have transpired over a crazy week. And we'll start off with the fact that NCAA tournament's going on, brackets were out. I figured we'd be talking a lot about this today and everything that's going on with the NCAA tournament and the argument over one seeds and everything else. Tom Brady back. He retired for about 40 days. It was like Noah's Ark. 40 days, 40 nights. Tom Brady is returning. Bruce Arians said he'd be shocked if he retired, then said he'd be shocked if he returned. Well, he also said that they would be shocked if they signed Antonio Brown. So Bruce Arians is a guy who loves being shocked. But this is a good surprise for Bruce, because he gets his quarterback back. Tom Brady, who retired and stepped away after throwing for more yards than he'd ever thrown for in his career, albeit it was 17 games, but steps away from a team that's still, like, they've got some holes, but they're still in a great place to win. And if you start looking at this, the AFC is really loaded up on quarterbacks. The NFC, especially with Russ leaving and ultimately heading over to Denver and going to the AFC, now you start looking at it. All right, still no Drew Brees. Now you could eventually maybe have Deshaun Watson in the South, which we'll get to in a little bit. Deshaun Watson, Carolina, maybe New Orleans. Look out west, Jimmy G, Trey Lance. We'll see how that all shakes out if Jimmy G ends up moving on. Kyler Murray, Matt Stafford, Aaron Rodgers up in the north. But that's really it for the most part. You got Dak in Dallas, but Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers are the class of the NFC. And that's why I think Tom chose to come back. And I've heard a lot of people, why? Why would Tom Brady want to return? Look at everything he has. He has tons of money that he's made on his own. His wife has gobs of money. He's got a family. He's in his mid-40s. Why return? And part of it is routine and it's habit. Players are like animals a little bit, like migratory animals. It starts to get cold, it's time to go south. Starts to get warm, time to go north. After the season, take a little time off, start easing your way back in. Free agency starts, the combine, it's time to start working out, and you start getting that itch. Usually guys take a couple months off, and they don't start getting that itch until maybe like OTAs, and then maybe the start of training camp again, when you really start preparing for the season. But Tom is a relentless preparer. And so people have reached out to me on Twitter, like they feel almost bad for Tom Brady. Like he's addicted to football. He can't give it up. He's in a rut. And it's no different than like an executive who retires, and just really can't step away. The difference between Tom Brady and, a business exec for 35, 40 years is Tom's still a young man by societal standards. He's in his early 40s. Heck, he looks like he's in his 30s. He's aged in reverse. He's still at the top of his game. He can still do it better than just about anybody else. And he's doing something that he's loved his entire life. He did it before playing for 22 years. Heck, the guy did it for over a decade for free. And so that's the difference, is you're getting to live out your childhood dream. So if you can still do it, go do it. A lot of times what happens is ultimately like your desire isn't there and physically you still have it. I think that's what Tom maybe was oscillating with. Most of the time what happens is most of the time what happens is you just get burned out. You don't have it, and physically maybe you can still do it. Like it's either one or the other. Either your physical nature goes or ultimately your desire goes. And it happens differently for everyone. And a lot of times your desire starts to fade due to the physical injuries and everything that you have. Tom's been pretty healthy throughout his career. He plays quarterback. He's had some big injuries, but let's face it, he's not getting hit. He's not banging on guys every play. He's a leader. He loves it. And he's still one of the best. And that's why it's so hard to walk away from something. 39 more touchdowns. And he's Tampa Bay's all-time leading touchdown passer. Think about that. 3 seasons of what he would have ultimately done. And we should have read the tea leaves. They just restructured Vita Vea's deal, their star defensive tackle. They franchise tagged Godwin. They wouldn't have done that unless they knew that they were a viable contender, because you're not just going to load up salary at receiver unless you have that quarterback. And so we should have known that the whole time. He's talking to Bruce Arians. He's talking to guys in the front office. They're having conversations about him potentially coming back. It makes sense. We should have seen all these things a while ago. And this isn't a knock on Tom Brady about him not loving his family, not wanting to do that. His wife doesn't want to see him get hit anymore. And anybody out there who has loved ones, you watch them play football, you cringe. The older they get, the more hits they take, you cringe. It's just the reality of how the game is and how it ultimately works. And so no one wants to see their loved ones doing it as they get older. But Tom still loves doing it. He doesn't get hit very much. He's a quarterback. He gets rid of the football. I love that he's coming back. It's absolutely great for the NFL. It's great for the game. It's great for me to ultimately talk about, and everybody else as well. NFL's better with Tom Brady in it. I do think, though, this may be it. And he may have resigned, I'm going to come back and do this right one more time, and then I'll be on my way out. Or maybe he just says, I'll play until I physically really can't do it anymore. I don't think he wants to be Joe Namath out there staggering around, or Willie Mays staggering around in the outfield. But as long as I'm still playing at a high level and I'm Tom Brady, I'm going to continue to roll that thing out there and see what happens. Plus, now he's got his boy Gronk, who was circling around trying to see where he could go. We'll see if Gronk ultimately comes back to Tampa too, because that wouldn't shock me in the least. The return of Rob Gronkowski to Tampa Bay, because him and Tom seem to have something going on that, like Rocky and Bullwinkle, or I don't know, an old reference, something like that. Batman and Robin, Tom is calm, cool, and collected, and Gronk's his big meathead buddy. Kind of like, maybe of Mice and Men, even a little bit. Lenny and George, I don't know. That might be a bad analogy, but that's where we're at right now. Some receiver news. Amari Cooper going to get cut by Dallas. Then he gets traded for the Cleveland Browns. So Dallas sends Cooper in the 6th round pick to Cleveland. They get back a 5th round pick and a 6th. So essentially they swap 6, give up a 5th for Cooper, move up about 10 spots, 12 spots in the 6th round. Help that out. Why would the Browns do this? Why not just let him hit free agency? Number one, it's a 5th round pick. So the value of that, not that you can't get a good player, but the likelihood of getting a really good player is it's slim at that point. And so we get that. Cooper initially signed basically, it was a 5-year, $100 million deal. In essence, it was a 2-year, $40 million deal. Dallas could release him, really no cap penalty at that point. And so this is what Cleveland's doing. Instead of getting on the open market and bidding for him, where you'd ultimately have to give up guaranteed dollars to sign him and outbid somebody else, you can bring him in for a 5th round pick. And you know what? If he's bad in camp, you could always cut him. If it doesn't work out, you could release him. And you're not out any money against your salary cap. If you had to sign him, you wouldn't have that flexibility to do it. And so Cleveland now has him basically on a 3-year deal where it's going to be roughly 20 million-ish a year that they'll have to pay out. And if you at any point in time he's not worth it, well, you can just cut bait. They could always restructure in the future or do something like that. But it's a very, very shrewd move by the Cleveland Browns to get this done and to keep the control of Amari Cooper salary wise and make sure that you have a team friendly deal, which there's a big dollar amount on the salary, but it's not punitive if you ever decide to move on. So a great move right there. And then what this also does is it gives them the flexibility to then go best player available with 13 in the NFL draft. A lot of people still think they'll still go receiver, but it depends who's there. If the receivers they like, whether it's Garrett Wilson, whoever it might be, get gobbled up, okay, well, then you don't have to feel like you have to reach. Maybe you could trade back down, pick up some draft assets. It's a very deep receiver draft. Maybe you can get Jameson Williams later in the first round. Maybe you trade up from your second pick if you still want receiver, and you can always kind of parcel it out that way. But it gives you flexibility where you're not going to be handcuffed saying we have to have a wideout. Probably still going to get one early first 2 rounds, but you don't necessarily have to have one. Jarvis Landry, also released by the Cleveland Browns, and he was due $16 million. And the reality is, he's a slot receiver. His play on the field wasn't worth that. But Jarvis Landry was worth so much more to the Cleveland Browns for what he provided them in intangibles. And I surprised that they couldn't get some sort of restructure done. I don't know how much he would have wanted, whether it would have been, 8 million, 10 million, wouldn't come off his 16 million number too much, but he helped turn that culture around. He is a bell cow. He's a lighthouse in the storm. You have to have somebody like that. And he has turned this thing in Cleveland. It's like turning a cruise ship. And he was the one up there cranking that thing around. So sorry that he's going to be leaving. There is a small path for him to return, but you don't really feel like it's all that likely. He'll be able to garner some good dollars on the free agent market. But Cleveland knew they were going to do this, and they set themselves up for success by bringing in Amari Cooper and doing it in a very, very shrewd way. So that naturally leads us to Baker Mayfield. So Baker Mayfield, it's his future like the quarterback of the Cleveland Browns. Not going to get the contract extension here going into the season. And what are Cleveland's options? Well, it doesn't look like Derek Carr is going to be available. Kirk Cousins gets his extension, another guaranteed year lopped on that thing. Teddy Bridgewater just got signed by Miami to really be a backup down there for 1 year. People threw out Mitchell Trubisky. He's going to be in Pittsburgh. Marcus Mariota, is he a viable option? Would he be better than Baker? Well, there might be some elements of Mariota's game that are better than Baker. I tend to think Baker at his best is better than Mariota, but that's kind of it. Do you trade for a Jimmy Garoppolo? Is that an answer? Some people are staunchly against that. Some people love it. Deshaun Watson, he's not going there. Like, I don't see that. I think that he's going to Carolina. We'll get into all that. But I honestly think with Baker, you're kind of, I wouldn't say stuck, but this is what it is. So you load up around him, give him the best possible assets you can on the offense. Make sure you try to bring as many people back. You got Amari Cooper, get him another receiver, pair him up there. You got Donovan Peoples-Jones. You've got some talented players. You've got Nick Chubb, the running game, have to reinforce that defensive line. Then you let Baker have his year, play his way into a deal. If you give us 2020, Baker, we're going to give you the deal. 2021, well, we might let you walk. I would love to see a little bit of competition. I would love to see Marcus Mariota come in there and compete kind of for the job, push Baker a little bit. And just because I think Baker ultimately would win that job. And if he doesn't, well, it's because I think Marcus Mariota obviously would be the better solution. But give Baker a little nudge. Give him a little nudge. And Mariota's probably that only option, assuming he doesn't get gobbled up by the time you're listening to this thing, because it's moving so rapidly right now. Deshaun Watson. Where is he ultimately going to land? Talked about some of these spots getting gobbled up. Carolina made a huge play last year for Matt Stafford. Went all in to get him. They thought they had him after the draft. And ultimately he goes down, the Cabo story of legend. He sits down there and him and Sean McVay hang out, and Detroit does a solid and sends him out there probably for maybe equal or a little bit less compensation. to Los Angeles than what Carolina was offering. And Carolina knows they need a quarterback. They got a pretty decent roster outside of that, but they've got to upgrade that position. They've got to find a way to make it better. And so, looking at this, they can't have a guy, who's just going to manage. Teddy B was that guy. Sam Darnold looked like he could have been good earlier in the year, but then turned into a little bit more of an average quarterback. And Tepper wants somebody who's going to be good. And so they're going to swing big. And it's reported that already are throwing out 3 ones. Carolina Panthers throwing out 3 ones allegedly for for throwing out 3 ones for Deshaun Watson. I understand why the Carolina Panthers will do it. He's the best guy out there. I don't think they're afraid of everything legally. He's gotten through the criminal aspect of it. Now he's doing civil. The question is, what will the NFL do for suspension? He already sat all last year. I would just be a proponent. If you're going to discipline him, he's missed enough games already. He did get paid. So then go back and turn those into some sort of unpaid suspension and fine him 4 game checks, 6 game checks. I'm not saying do that, but he shouldn't have to miss any more games unless there's something that comes out in the civil trial or, in the civil hearings that's over the top. But at some point we have to trust our legal system and to let that play out. The charges couldn't be brought. And so I think it's either going to be the Saints or going to be the Carolina Panthers. Keep in mind, Deshaun Watson has a full no trade. Saints have a better roster. New Orleans Saints, I think, are a better football team. However, Sean Payton isn't coaching them there anymore. If Sean Payton was there, I think ultimately Deshaun Watson would try to get that done. If the Saints could muster up the draft capital and handle the cap situation to be able to get him. That would require a lot of restructuring and some roster moves and some things to get done because they're pretty tight on the cap. Carolina doesn't have to worry about that. They've got the space. They have the draft picks. They can go make the move. I think Deshaun Watson ultimately ends up with the Carolina Panthers. I think that's a pretty good fit for him. I think Matt Rule's offense would be pretty good. And remember, Matt Rule signed a big deal, getting paid a lot. And has had some success there in Carolina, but their ownership group isn't the most patient in the world. Mitchell Trubisky, 2-year deal signed by the Pittsburgh Steelers. If you're a Steelers fan, I don't think you're overly excited about this deal. What is Trubisky giving you? Hell, you got to think about this. 4 years basically started in Buffalo, or 4 years basically started in Chicago. Last season was in Buffalo, averaging a little less than 200 yards per game, throwing the ball, 64-38 touchdown to interception ratio, 87 passer rating, 29-21 as a starter. He's been okay. I think a little bit at the end of Chicago, just being there, dealing with the media, the expectations, everything that was coming with it got in his head. With a coach that can utilize his skills inside and outside the pocket, I think Trubisky could be a decent NFL quarterback. I don't know if that Matt Nagy was really doing that in Chicago. And then I think everybody's trying to save their own skin. It just got to be a bad and untenable situation. I think he improved probably from sitting here in Buffalo. Pittsburgh, their options right there, not all that great. As you sit here and you ultimately look at Mason Rudolph, is that the guy you want to roll with? I've heard stories out of Pittsburgh. They're like, the drop between him and Ben was the biggest in the league as far as starter to backup. And that wasn't like Ben 3 years ago. This was Ben this year. And so if that's the case, they cannot roll him out there. Their team knows that, based upon what happened last year. It's not a great situation. He started 10 games over 3 years. He's averaged less than 140 yards passing, 16-11 TD to interception ratio, 81 passer rating. He's 5-4-1 as a starter. Like Mason Rudolph, he needs to be better, and he's not going to be better. You have 3 years of a sample size now where he's had a pretty decent roster. Now, last year, I know line wasn't great. The receiving core wasn't maybe as good as it's been in the past. So they've got work to do to be able to improve it. But I think Mitchell Trubisky wins the starting job for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I think he actually becomes pretty good. You got to remember, too, Mitchell Trubisky from Cleveland, Ohio, from Mentor. Went down to Carolina, but from Cleveland, Ohio. Now he's going to be in Pittsburgh. The motivation is going to be there in division. A lot of people in Cleveland were clamoring to bring him in to potentially compete with Baker. I think Baker would ultimately beat him out. but we'll see the best of Mitchell Trubisky this season. I think they'll try to surround pieces around him to allow him to succeed. I think he beats out Mason Rudolph, and you're going to see ultimately whatever it is Mitchell Trubisky can be. I think you'll see him start to trend that way. If he starts trending good, well, then maybe I think he can be, an average to above average starter when he plays well. If he doesn't, well, then he's probably going to be relegated to being a career backup. And that's kind of where it is. And 2-year deal with him for Pittsburgh. Another quarterback deal, 1-year deal for Teddy Bridgewater in Miami, going down there to back up Tua, going home. You got to remember he's a Miami guy before he ultimately went to college at Louisville. They've spoken very, very highly of Tua, and I think they want this to be his team. They want him to have success. But if he doesn't, you have a guy now in Teddy Bridgewater who doesn't have the highest ceiling in the world, but he's got a pretty darn high floor. He does a good job getting the ball out of his hands. He doesn't have the strongest arm in the world. He's a pretty good athlete still, despite having some of the injuries, and he can go out there and he can win you games. This Dolphins roster, in my opinion, I think is pretty darn good. And you saw how well they played, obviously, down the stretch at the end of the season. They just, Mike Gesicki signed his franchise tag, their star tight end. I think he's going to continue to improve. They'll get a deal done with him. Brought in some running backs. Like they have some weapons around him. If that defense can continue to stay playing at a high level, this is what you could ultimately have in a pretty good team. And if ultimately Tua doesn't play well, then you go to Teddy B. And he is a great backup option for you. A little bit of non-quarterback news. Roger Stafford can, I think, go down as kind of a sneaky good signing. Played about a decade almost for the Rams, played the last couple of years with the Titans, signed by the Buffalo Bills, made a Pro Bowl last season. Roger Stafford playing guard. Buffalo is going to continue to invest in their offensive line. Number one, to protect Josh Allen, but two, to get that running game going. And Roger Stafford still got a lot of good gas in the tank. I like what he's been able to do. He's played in a ton of games. He's had great longevity. He's been healthy the majority of his career. I think that's going to go down as a sneaky good sign. If this Buffalo run game begins to pick up, you'll be able to look back to around mid-March and say, you know what, that's signing Roger Stafford. He helped get that done. And he's a guy who's been in the playoffs. He's a great veteran presence. He's someone who you want around. There aren't a lot of veterans now in the NFL anymore. There's guys who have played a long time, then you're basically in your stars, and then you start going to, your guys on rookie deals. But guys sitting there between years 5 and years 11 or 12, unless they're big name quarterbacks or super elite players, you don't have a ton of those dudes. Roger Stafford, he's probably not on the elite end, but he's going to bring you a lot of intangibles as well, with what he's able to bring to the table, his experience, his leadership, and a lot of those things. And then lastly, Frank Clark trying to renegotiate and restructure his deal with Kansas City. And so this is what happens with Kansas City. Tyrann Mathieu, he's gone. They make their decisions of ultimately who you can sign. And they made a decision. They're investing, obviously, in Patrick Mahomes. They're investing in Tyreek Hill, the cheetah. Travis Kelce are investing in. They put a lot of cash in that offensive line. They're going to be predominantly an offensive football team, and everybody gets that. And then defensively, they invested in Chris Jones and paid him. And so you only have so many dollars now to go around. And Frank Clark, unless he wants to take a nice discount and not just a restructuring to push money, guaranteed money into the future and take a signing bonus now, probably going to ask him to take a little bit of a haircut too. And so maybe he wants to do that to ultimately win and try to go chase the Super Bowl. But if not, this is what you're going to start seeing as you get this big balloon quarterback contract, which isn't, an albatross right now. And Pat Mahomes is going to probably play his way and be worth every penny of it, but you have to start remaking your team, remaking your defense in the position groups that you don't emphasize. And so to do that now, you have to draft really well. And that is the position the Kansas City Chiefs are in basically at this point in time. Some of the veteran pieces they brought in that helped kind of get them over the hump and helped them have success the last 3-4 years. Those guys are on their way out. They cannot afford to pay all of them. You're paying some of your young guys that are coming through. And because of that now, they have to make tough decisions. And so Frank Clark, we'll see over the next 24, 48 hours how that ultimately looks, if they can get a deal done, or if we ultimately see him getting released and then being released, obviously, into the free agent market. Well, that's all for this edition of Carps Corner. Got some more stuff coming. We got a special Buckeyes spring ball recap that I'll have pushed out for the next one. So that'll cover everything Ohio State and what happened the first couple of practices and kind of where everybody is and where that's going to be going. And then we're going to always can keep you up. Free agency in the NFL, everything moving there, and March Madness and the brackets and everything that's going on with that. Thanks for tuning in to this edition of Carps Corner.